The hall was the most beautiful and the most terrifying place Elara had ever stood in. Stone pillars rose from the floor all the way to the ceiling, carved with the symbols of every pack that had ever bowed to the Alpha King. Hundreds of candles burned in iron holders along the walls, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. The air smelled of pine and old wood, and something wilder, something that reminded every wolf in the room exactly where they stood in the order of the world. At the very end of the hall, on a throne made of black stone, sat King Caden Voss. Elara had heard stories about him since she was a child. Every wolf had. He was the strongest alpha in 300 years. His wolf was ancient and enormous, silver-coated and powerful in a way that made other wolves go still just from being near him. He had ended a war at 22 years old, simply by walking onto the battlefield. He had never lost a fight. He had never been refused anything. Until tonight, he had never met Elara Vane. She stood at the back of the long line of wolves waiting to take part in the submission ceremony. The ceremony happened once a year. Every newly ranked wolf, every delta, every beta, every guardian, came to the hall and knelt before the king. It was tradition. It was law. It was the way things had always been done. Elara was not newly ranked. She was not anything, according to the pack registry. The records listed her as an omega, the lowest rank a wolf could carry, from a border pack that no longer existed. She had no home pack. She had no alpha. She had no standing in any court in the Northern Territories. She was here because of Soren. Soren was 20 years old, newly ranked as a delta, and completely terrified. He was also the only person in the world who had shown Elara genuine kindness in the past 4 years. When she had been wandering alone after her birth pack dissolved, Soren had found her near the Eastern River. He had given her food and shelter and asked nothing in return. He was the closest thing to family she had left. He had asked her to come today because he was afraid of standing in the hall alone. She had said yes because she could not say no to him, but she had not promised to kneel. She watched as wolf after wolf walked to the base of the throne steps and dropped to one knee. The king watched each of them with calm, flat eyes. He nodded. They rose. They stepped aside. It was orderly and quick and completely without warmth, like watching people sign a document they had not been allowed to read. Soren went before her. His hands were shaking, but he knelt cleanly, and the king nodded at him with something that might have been approval. Soren rose and walked to the side of the room, and as he passed Elara, he gave her a look that was equal parts relief and warning. She stepped forward. The hall did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a tide pulls back before a wave, slowly, and then completely. People near the front noticed first, then the ones behind them, then the ones near the doors. By the time Elara stopped walking, 3 feet from the base of the throne steps, every single person in the hall was watching her. She did not look at them. She looked at the king. Up close, he was even more striking than the stories had suggested. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing with no decoration except the silver ring on his right hand that marked him as king. His hair was black. His eyes were a pale, clear silver, like the color of sky just before snow. He sat completely still, as if he had been sitting on that throne for 1,000 years, and had no plans to move. His court enforcer stepped forward. The man was large and official-looking, with a deep voice designed to carry across large rooms. "Kneel before your king," he said. Elara kept her eyes on Caden. "He is not my king." The silence in the hall became a different kind of silence. Before, it had been the silence of attention. Now it was the silence of shock. The enforcer's face went red. "You are standing in the royal hall of Ironmore. You will show proper respect, or you will be removed." "I came here peacefully," Elara said. Her voice was calm. She was not performing calm. She genuinely felt it, which surprised even her. "I have done nothing wrong. I will not kneel before someone I have not chosen to follow." The enforcer reached for her arm. She stepped back, not quickly, not dramatically, just a single, clear step that said without words, "Do not touch me." From the throne, a quiet voice said, "Leave her." Every head turned. The enforcer froze. The king had not moved from his throne, but his eyes, which had been flat and distant through every other wolf ceremony, were now focused on Elara with an attention that felt almost physical, like something pressing gently against the air between them. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it carried. It was the kind of voice that rooms simply listen to. "No one who belongs to you," Elara answered. For a long moment, nothing happened. The candles burned. The shadows moved on the walls. 300 wolves held their breath. Then something changed in the king's face. It was small. A slight shift. A flicker behind his eyes, like a lamp turning on in a room that had been dark for a long time. He looked at her as if she were a problem he had not encountered before, and was genuinely curious about the answer. He stood up. The sound of the king rising from his throne during the submission ceremony sent a ripple through the hall that Elara felt against her skin. People near the walls actually stepped back. The noble wolves in the front rows exchanged wide, alarmed glances. And then, Elara felt something else entirely. It started in her chest, a warmth, deep and steady, like a fire lit in a room that had been cold for years. It spread outward slowly, moving through her arms, and down to her hands, and up along the back of her neck. It was not painful. It was not frightening exactly. It was the strangest sensation she had ever felt, because it was coming from somewhere outside herself and landing inside her like it already knew where it belonged. She recognized what it was. Every wolf knew what it was, the way every person knows what lightning looks like even if they have never seen a storm. It was a bond being formed. The king's wolf, the ancient, silver, legendary creature that shared its existence with the man on the throne, was reaching across the space between them and choosing her. Not because she had knelt, not because she had been respectful or composed or any of the things a person was supposed to be in a royal hall. It was choosing her because of exactly what she was standing here being right now. The king's silver eyes blazed white. The hall erupted. Not with screaming, with noise, which was somehow worse. 300 voices speaking at once, chairs scraping, people standing, the enforcer turning to the king's advisors with an expression of pure panic. In the front row, a tall woman in a silver gown went completely still, her face draining of all color. She was Lady Seraphine, the noble-born wolf who had been positioned for the past 2 years as the king's most likely political match. She stared at Elara with an expression that was beyond anger. It was disbelief so complete, it had not yet decided what to become. Elara barely saw any of it. Her own wolf, the part of her she had kept quiet and controlled for 4 long years, the part she had learned to keep leashed because showing it in the wrong place had always put her in danger, rose up inside her for the first time in as long as she could remember. It rose without asking permission. It answered the call the way a flame answers wind, not by going out, but by burning higher. She took a step back. Her heel caught the edge of a floor stone, and she steadied herself. "No," she said, quietly, to no one in particular. She was not speaking to the king. She was not speaking to the court, or the crowd, or the enforcer still frozen 3 feet away. She was speaking to the bond itself, to the warm, certain, completely uninvited thing spreading through her chest. And she meant it. The king walked down the steps of the throne. He moved through the chaos the way water moves through rock, not around it, simply through it. The crowd parted without being asked. His advisors called after him. He did not stop. He walked across the floor of the hall until he was standing in front of Elara, close enough that she had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. Up close, he smelled like pine forests and cold rain. His eyes, still blazing with that silver-white light, looked at her with an expression she had not expected to find on the face of a king. He looked uncertain. "You refuse to kneel," he said. His voice was quiet enough now that only she could hear it beneath the noise of the hall. "I still refuse," she said. He was quiet for a moment, a long moment. "Walk with me," he said, not like a command, not entirely like a request. Somewhere between the two, like a man who had spent his entire life commanding things and was genuinely unsure how else to speak. Elara looked at him. She looked at the hand he had not extended, because he had not been foolish enough to offer it. She looked at the hall behind him, the chaos, the stairs, the lady in the silver gown who now looked as though the entire world had shifted beneath her feet, which in some ways it had. She looked back at the king. "I will walk with you," she said. "I will not follow you." Something passed through his expression that was too quick and too complicated to name. "Those are the same thing," he said. "They are not," she replied. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the great doors at the far end of the hall. And Elara walked beside him, not behind, not below, not half a step back in the way that people walked beside someone they were deferring to. Beside him, squarely, as if she walked beside kings every day of her life, and found it entirely unremarkable. The crowd parted for both of them. Outside, the night was cold and clear. The stars were out in full. The torches along the outer wall of the hall burned orange against the dark blue sky, and the stone courtyard was empty except for the two of them, and the sound of distant voices still carrying through the hall doors behind them. Elara stopped walking and turned to face him. "I will not be a title," she said. "I will not be a political arrangement. I will not become something your court can point to and explain." She held his gaze steadily. "And I will not kneel, not for a ceremony, not for a tradition, not for you." Caden looked at her for a long time. The glow had faded from his eyes, but something remained, a depth and a focus that had not been there when she had first seen him on the throne. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting one thing and found something entirely different, and was still deciding what to make of it. "My wolf has never made a mistake," he said. "Your wolf does not know me," she said. "No," he agreed. And then, after a pause, "But it wants to." The bond was still there between them. She could feel it, steady and warm and patient, as though it had all the time in the world, as though it had been waiting a very long time already, and was not bothered by waiting a little longer. She looked away from him, out toward the dark tree line beyond the courtyard walls. The cold night air moved through her hair. Behind them, she could still hear the noise of the hall, voices raised, boots on stone, the sound of a world trying to understand what it had just witnessed. She thought about Soren, who was probably standing in the middle of all that noise looking terrified and apologetic. She thought about the road she had taken to get here. 4 years of walking alone, of sleeping in places that were not home, of building herself into someone who needed nothing from anyone. She thought about the look on the king's face when she had refused to kneel. Not anger, not offense, something that looked, if she was honest, remarkably like the beginning of respect. She took a slow breath of cold air and let it out. "You should go back inside," she said. "Your court is in chaos." "My court is always in some kind of chaos," he said. "It manages." Despite herself, and very much against her wishes, the corner of her mouth moved upward, just slightly. She controlled it quickly, but not quickly enough. She saw him notice. She turned and walked toward the courtyard gate without another word. Her steps were unhurried and certain on the stone path, her back straight, her head up. He did not call after her. He did not send anyone to follow her. He stood where she had left him and watched her go, and he let her, because somehow, without anyone explaining it to him, he already understood that this was not an ending. Behind them, 300 wolves had just watched the Alpha King's wolf choose a woman who had not knelt, who had not begged, who had not performed a single thing to earn it. She had simply stood exactly as she was, and that had been enough. The story of that night would travel from the royal hall to every corner of the northern territories before the week was out. Some would call it impossible. Some would call it a sign. Some would call it a problem that needed to be solved quickly before it became something larger. But those who had been standing closest to the throne, those who had seen the king's face in the moment his wolf made its choice, would always say the same thing when asked about it later. They would say that for one brief, unguarded moment, the most powerful alpha in 300 years had looked at a woman who refused to bow to him, and had looked at her the way a person looks at the one thing in the world they did not know they were searching for. She had left, but the bond did not leave with her. It settled between them like a stone dropped into still water, sending quiet rings outward in every direction, changing the shape of everything around it. And somewhere on the dark road beyond the courtyard gate, walking alone and steady under a sky full of stars, Elara felt it too, and kept walking anyway.